Hello, welcome to Zero Hanger's latest edition of our 2024 Trade Target Series. And today, to go through Geelong's potential targets come the off-season, is Zero Hanger reporter Aidan Shillane. Aidan, how are you, mate?
Good, thanks, Mitch. How are you?
Very well, very well. Up to our latest instalment. As mentioned, we're covering the Cats, who are often a pretty busy club come the off-season. Weren't so as much in 2023, but a few names kind of linked to them this year. One being quite a big one who we'll start off with in a second. But where do you kind of see Geelong at after a kind of up and down first half of the year? And what do you think they need to look at their list moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, clearly they're kind of in a transitional phase. Danger toward the end of his career. It looks like Tomahawk as well might be his last year. Let's hope he gets back for a farewell game. But they've been doing it for the last 10, 15 years where they kind of seem to regenerate on the run. They've blooded a lot of young players through the midfield and down back as well. And we've seen, Shannon Neal up forward get a chance at the senior level, which has been good for them to kind of see where they stand. But yeah, in terms of the future, I think as we'll touch on in a moment, they're looking at some younger players, probably in the mid-20s age bracket where they can kind of come in and fill a role almost straight away as long as they learn the system pretty quickly under Chris Scott. But yeah, I kind of like where they're at the moment, just in terms of not bottoming out like we've seen North Melbourne and the Hawks do in previous years, and even West Coast as well.
Yeah, there'll be plenty of, retirements, as you mentioned, over the few years, just given we know where their list demographic is at. And that'll, they've had a pretty large attention on the draft last year. I think they brought in 7 players, and I think half of them were mature age recruits though. So they have found some good ones so far this year, and I think it'll be even balance this year on trade, free agency and draft come the off-season. But we'll get into our list. And the first one is one of the more popular players in the competition, one who's been spoken about at length when it's come to Geelong and a few other clubs in their trade interests, is Bailey Smith. Seems very unlikely he'll be at the Bulldogs next year. The Dogs have managed to prioritise a few names ahead of him, with Aaron Norton, Jamari Ugle-Hagan, likely Tim English re-signing, Cody Waitman's re-signed this week, Jed Bustlinger another one. So Smith's certainly at the back end of the pecking order. Whether that's them knowing that he was kind of keen to leave and look for a more senior midfield role is one thing, and he'll certainly get that at Geelong. But he certainly wouldn't come cheap, given his potential, what we know he's been able to do on the field. And at the same time, he's got plenty of football left in him. I think the only thing that will take off from him is obviously his recent injury.
Yeah, I mean, I think we quickly forget that he was a bit of a star player for the Dogs, especially that 2021 final series, obviously missing this whole year. Through that ACL injury, he was a former pick 7 in the 2018, Super Draft back then, if you really think about it. But yeah, I think what the Cats will probably have to give up, which is kind of why Collingwood is out of the race and leaves Geelong and Hawthorn on deck, is the fact they've got first round selections. I think Geelong hold pick 14 and 34, which they could package together to sweeten the deal to get Smith down the highway to Cardinia Park. But I mean, it's a pretty interesting prospect when you think about what he could actually go for from the Dogs and what they'll ask. But I think, first round pick and maybe a mid to late second might get the deal done. But I guess it depends how much hardball the Dogs do want to play with him in this upcoming trade period.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they're asking for 2 firsts. But the term first round pick is so vague now, given it can really be anywhere from pick 1 to close to pick 30, as we saw last year. So, interesting situation. I think 14 probably needs to be a bit earlier, but as you mentioned, they'll have some other picks potentially to throw in there, the Cats, although they'll certainly drive out bargains as late as they can, as they have done for a few players they've both gained and lost over the last few years. So that'll be the case for a lot of players you'd think they're interested in this year. Now, haven't been too many others that they've necessarily been tied to with heavy interest. So we've looked at, I guess, a few names, whether it's local products from the Geelong region, maybe a list need, maybe just some of those youthful players or positional needs. So one local product, I think out of Barwon Heads in the Ballerina area, was Ned McHenry. Hasn't quite had the opportunity nor the form that we thought he might have this year at Adelaide, off contract, and certainly could, be in need of a change of scenery at the end of the year. Can offer some spark in the front half, but we just haven't seen that, and hence why he hasn't been in the Adelaide senior side in recent weeks. So potentially the Cats could look at him as a kind of bargain recruit who's got plenty of footy on his side to come, given his age.
Yeah, I think 23, 24, so kind of right in that ripe age where you start to really find yourself as an AFL footballer. I think what's going for him. He plays with a lot of enthusiasm and intent. As you mentioned, he's not necessarily first choice under Matthew Nicks of the Crows, but what he does come in and what you will get from him every game that he does get is that effort, that, that undivided effort where he just gives his all every single game that he plays, which is something that is probably quite undervalued. I mean, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't have, the mental capacity to put your best foot forward in every contest, in every quarter, in every game, you could almost look a bit silly out there. And I think Ned McHenry, despite him probably falling down the pecking order at the Crows, with a lot of the star players that they do have, especially in that front half, I think he could actually do quite well at a team like Geelong if the Cats were to explore an option like that, to bring in, as we've mentioned, some of that youth where they can kind of just come in and play a role straight away, which would be an interesting look at if the Cats were to go down that path.
Next on our list, more of a left field option, and I guess it's one he hasn't been spoken about much this year in any kind of trade discussions, but still without a deal as we arrive into the back end of the season, is Ed Langdon at Melbourne. Obviously a premiership member of them, at his second club after starting his career at Fremantle, came to Victoria to join the D's, and again without a contract for 2025 season. I think just with Geelong, wanting a kind of player in his age profile as well, who's got plenty of football on his side. But B, I think the wing area is maybe something that they look at. They've obviously moved Max Holmes more to a halfback or sometimes inside midfield role. They've had to rely at times on players like Zach Tui. I think they've gotten a bit out of Ollie Dempsey this year, which has been great to see, but I think someone else a bit more senior out in the wings with Max Holmes' transition might be a kind of value pick. He's not going to come cheap, but at the very least would be a instant spark for them in offering some run.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Andrew Mackie, I'll be looking at kind of these left field options like you did mention, and Ed Langdon is definitely one of those. It's still quite interesting that he doesn't have a contract for 2025 and beyond at the D's. I mean, from the outset, he looks like he's loving his time there. He's locked down that wing role under Simon Goodwin. So you'd think it's very unlikely that he want to move. But I mean, if Geelong sold him, kind of the dream down to the highway, which they have done to so many players and so many times, successfully, might I add, it definitely could be an option that Chris Scott and the Cats do look at for 2025.
Another one who can offer some runs, some nice long kicking, and a bit of forward half flair if need be, is Curtis Taylor at North Melbourne. Again, another off-contract name as they all are on this list, and just similar, I guess, to McHenry in a way. Not a staple in the Roosters senior side, and still a young player who could maybe benefit from a new environment.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about this off here. His versatility, Curtis Taylor at the Kangaroos, is probably his ability to play maybe as a defensive pressure forward, a lead up forward, even the halfback you mentioned. He's got a pretty powerful kick to drive him out of the back line. And again, he's one of those players kind of like Ned McHenry, where he gives his 100% all, that effort, he just loves to compete and loves to give the opportunity. Now, North Melbourne, as we know, are kind of in this transitional phase where they're trying to figure out what's their next premiership side look like. And given that he's not picked most weeks, or hasn't been maybe recently, that he could be not part of that next generation. So, and again, out of contract. So definitely an option for rival clubs to look at if they were to go down that path as well.
Now, one name we did have on our list for our editorial on zerohanger.com was Samson Ryan at Richmond, who I think it was as early as yesterday re-signed with the Tigers. So we can put a line through his name as a potential target for the Cats. But that kind of ruck forward hybrid is probably an area that they do look at. I think you mentioned Shannon earlier in the show, and he is slowly showing some glimpses that we want to see. But at the same time, it's probably still a similar position that I think they would want to look at in the off-season, whether it's someone who's more ruck-dominated, just given Toby Conway is another who's getting there, but injuries are starting to kind of build up in quite a short little time in his career. And then, they lose Tom Hawkins, so does Neil fill their forward void, and then who fills that kind of ruck void if Conway doesn't quite get that body right? So Ryan was a probably pretty good fit. You can look at someone maybe like Wade Dirksen, probably a bit smaller and more of a forward than a ruck, but can pinch hit. But there's a few names out there that I think that they could look at, and certainly is an area that the Cats would consider. Yeah,
I mean, clearly Chris Scott is trying to figure out his perfect mix in that ruck role and that ruck forward role. He even chucked Sam De Koning there, who was a premiership defender a couple of years ago. I think he probably should stay defence in terms of Sam De Koning, that is, which means there is a vacancy in that ruck role. Reece Stanley's played VFL throughout the year. Mark Blitzarf has kind of trialled it, but I'd prefer him more as a midfielder or a run-with player, given his versatility. And as you mentioned, Conway and Neil have kind of been trialled in those roles as well, but probably have a bit of youth and inexperience on their side, which again opens up that role for a rival player to come in and fill.
Yeah, I think like someone like not off contract, but Sydney's Peter Laddams. Obviously, hard to see him breaking back into the senior side unless Grundy gets injured or one of their, or probably two of their key forwards get injured as well. So, I think he's signed for another year, but Geelong were interested in him when he left Port Adelaide. So he's probably one who more of a ruck, but can certainly play forward if need be and could be a good fit. So that'll wrap up our list for Geelong's trade targets. Our next episode we'll be covering Gold Coast under Damien Hardwick and his, second off-season at the helm at Carrara. And obviously for all the latest news, views and opinions, you can head to zerohanger.com.